decided to write a story about him and about his times and his family and his life in the White House through the voices of two of his sons. Now, Lincoln had four sons. One of them, Eddie, died at 2, virtually in childbirth, which affected their mother greatly. And Robert Lincoln, who lived long into the 20th century and was a most impatient and unpleasant man. If you look at a picture of Robert, he looks nothing like his father ever could possibly have looked. But Robert does appear in the book. But this is about Willie and Tad, and the book is in, first, Willie's voice in a trip to Chicago with his father a year before his father was inaugurated, and it builds up to the presidency. Willie was the star child of the family. He was the brilliant, wonderful, kind, and marvelous son. Tad also, they adored them equally. But Tad had a cleft palate. Not a hare lip, but a cleft palate, and was seriously dyslexic. He never learned to read or write or even dress himself. And so the amount of this problem that Tad had, or disability, is never specifically given. They were Victorian and they didn't talk about it. But the wonderful thing about Mary and Abraham Lincoln was they were 20th century parents. They truly were. It was as if they had read Dr. Spock 100 years before Dr. Spock was born, because they were so kind. And they believed to bring up their children with kindness and patience and firmness, instead of the Victorian children should be heard and not seen, or seen and not heard. And this is an extraordinary thing about Lincoln, and a lot of people don't know about it. And I thought, you know, if kids are going to learn about Lincoln, how about not doing the Stations of the Cross, which is the library books that were returned after the rainstorm and the writing on the shovel and all this stuff that you can read in the dough layers. But in this instance, I wanted to show him as a father, because he was such a good father. And Mary, who gets a very bad rap from history, because I don't believe for a second that she was crazy. You can read Catherine Clinton's wonderful new book, Mary Lincoln, and find out. She was not crazy. She had migraines. She was probably seriously depressed. She was probably so afflicted by the deaths of her sons that she had a nervous breakdown. But in those days, people were unkind about any kind of disability that showed, and they tried to hide it and put it in the closet. Mary was probably no crazier than any first lady of this century, and she did a lot of good too, and she deserves a good portrait. And so I wanted to show kids Mary Lincoln was okay. She was a great mother. She redid the White House 100 years before Jackie Kennedy did the same thing and got on CBS. And show Abraham Lincoln as a father. So the first half of the book is Willie's voice. The second half of the book is Tad Lincoln, because sadly, Willie died 1 year after his mother had begun this enormous renovation of the White House, which in itself is a wonderful story, and I wish there were pictures of what she did, but there are not. She complained when she moved into, I keep saying White House, Executive Mansion, that it had been lived in by far too many bachelors with spaniels that drooled all over the furniture, and she was going to change that. And she did, and she made it beautiful. And there was a great party in mid-February 1862. The war had begun. It was a year old. And all of Washington, all of the senators and representatives and foreign consulates and ambassadors, and everyone who was everyone, 1,000 people were invited to this wonderful new executive mansion. And it was a brilliant party with a feast. And upstairs, her two sons, Willie and Tad, were deathly ill, which with probably what might have been typhoid, might have been some other terrible illness caused by the sewage system in Washington at the time. We don't really know, but of course they didn't have anything back then except bleeding you off with cups, so there was no curing them. And there were doctors, but the doctors had no medicine. And so Willie died virtually in his brother's arms and left this earth and left his family so bereft. And the rest of the book is in Tad's words. And Tad was extremely bright, if dyslexic, and quite capable of telling the rest of the story, which is the next 4 years of war, and how his mother slowly recovered from this terrible devastation and grief, and how he became his father's one lifeline to any emotional stability. It's a marvelous story, and it is buried in the stories of the war and heroism and the generals and all of that. So I wanted to bring out something new and interesting about Lincoln.